You're listening to Soundside. I'm Libby Denkman. We won't have a full explanation for the implosion at a Longview paper processing mill for a while. The disaster left 11 people dead and released thousands of gallons of white liquor, which is a highly corrosive chemical used to break down wood chips into pulp. The tragedy highlights the risks when people work in close proximity with large quantities of dangerous chemicals. The plant is one of several big industrial facilities in the area. One worker at a nearby paper plant told the New York Times that he understood the industry's risks. He also said, quote, "Every day I go in and every day I leave. It's a blessing." Kyra Buckley looked into the pulp and paper mill industry and its safety record for Oregon Public Broadcasting. Kyra joins me now. Thank you so much for being here, Kyra. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Can you get us up to speed on the latest developments out of Longview briefly?
Yeah. As you just mentioned, this was a tragedy that killed 11 people. It happened just over a week ago on a Tuesday morning at about 7:15. That was during a shift change, so there was just a few more people on site than normally would be. Since then, there have been emergency responders, both local officials, state officials, and now federal officials on site. The U.S. Chemical Safety Board is leading the investigation. They're looking into both the workplace safety aspects. They're also looking into why this tank ruptured. It's going to be a while before we have answers. But in the meantime, this was a mill that people were actively working at every day. It is now just operating at what they call, critical infrastructure is operating. There are many people that are currently out of a job that are maybe working with unemployment. There are families that have just lost their loved ones. There are people that are still injured, and the community is really coming together to support one another as much as they can in this situation where we still have a lot of questions unanswered.
Can you remind us, before we jump into the safety record of the industry and how this plant was doing, what did the Nippon Dynawave packaging facility do, and what role did it play, or does it currently play, in Longview?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the Pacific Northwest is known for the timber industry. Now, it of course has declined in recent decades, but anybody that has traveled to the Pacific Northwest knows the vast amount of resources we have when it comes to forest and trees. Anytime you have an industry like that's extracting that natural resource, you have to do something with that resource. And so oftentimes industrial pockets will spring up near where the extraction is happening. And that's the case for the timber industry as well. And so Longview is one of those communities where the timber industry sends raw product to then get processed. And this specific plant processed wood chips into pulp product. That can be used for all sorts of things, but a lot of us will probably think of it as like cardboard, like for a milk carton, or like I drink a lot of sparkling water. It comes in those paperboard boxes.
Yep.
And it's just widely used across the industry. So that's one of the kind of main products that they were manufacturing there.
I grew up in the Seattle area, and my mom grew up in Port Angeles and Everett, and those paper mills in Port Angeles and Everett have since closed. But the pulp mill smell is something that if you know the Pacific Northwest. The Tacoma aroma, famously partially due to pulp mills in the area. There's just like a sense that when you roll into a town with a pulp and paper mill, you'll know it before you actually see it. It's kind of an integral memory for folks who are longtime Pacific Northwesterners. So since this disaster, you have looked into why these paper mills can be dangerous, and you looked into the industry safety record. What does that look like?
Yeah. So I want to start by saying that extractive industries like timber and the subsectors, including wood manufacturing, and other industries similar to that. I'm thinking of mining, oil and gas. I have a little bit of history reporting in Houston on the energy industry. These have all gotten safer over the decades, and the focus on safety, and there's lots of reasons why, but the focus on safety has gotten sharper. Having that said, we are talking about industries that are dealing with heavy machinery, that are dealing with these caustic chemicals, and they just remain dangerous. As you heard from that quote that you read from the New York Times, a lot of people that work in these industries, they know that. They go in eyes wide open, knowing that it is dangerous, knowing that anytime humans are involved, mistakes can happen. And yet there are processes and regulations in place that are supposed to make these things much safer. Having that said, the timber industry remains a very deadly industry across the country. In paper manufacturing alone, in 2024, 13 people were killed. That kind of puts this disaster, though, into perspective. So 13 people killed in 2024. That's the latest year on record for U.S. Bureau of Labor and Statistics. And so if that was the entire year of 2024, to lose 11 people in one accident, just I think shows the magnitude of what happened in Longview.
Yeah. So you also looked at the safety track record for this particular plant. What did you find?
So in the days leading right after the event, I spoke with the Department of Ecology in Washington. You know, they told me that they do not regulate the tank that was involved in this disaster, and they didn't see anything egregious on the record of this plant. However, I do want to say that this plant did have penalties with that department, about 8 penalties over 10 years, totaling about $40,000. Those were air quality violations and to a lesser extent, water quality violations and not connected to the tank. Having that said, I have colleagues that have been on the ground in Longview, and they have been talking to families impacted by this disaster and also people just in the community that either know people that were employed at the mill or work in the industry. And people are raising questions about the safety culture of the mill, and again, really want to see some answers about how something like this could happen. I also want to say my colleagues have talked to experts in this field, including former inspectors for the U.S. Chemical Safety Board, that really say for something like this to happen, it was likely a handful of things that went wrong at the same time, and that this disaster was magnified because of the time that it happened. So again, we know that there have been some violations at this mill in the past not related to the tank, and a lot of questions still remain at what could have gone wrong to cause such a horrific accident.
The time that it happened, meaning that shift change, as you mentioned, just having more people on site. Reporting in the Washington State Standard noted that there is no Washington state agency that was responsible for inspecting the 900,000-gallon chemical storage tank that ruptured. And that's unlike other types of storage tanks that would be at a facility like this. You've covered the energy industry before. I mean, is this normal to not have a state regulatory body overlooking these types of things? What type of regulation is common here in a plant like this?
That's such a great question because the truth is it's complicated and challenging, and it's different depending on where you are. So I think that's one of the frustrating things that happens in the aftermath of this type of tragedy is that you want to know which agency, who is responsible for making sure that these, big pieces of important equipment are safe. And often the answer is multiple. But to your point or to your question, there is sometimes a state agency that comes in. There is sometimes a federal agency that is tasked with it. My understanding is that this would be under federal purview. However, it's really unclear who would come in and how that would be triggered. But if you are, let's say, in the energy industry in Texas, yeah, there would be a state regulator that would at least every now and again stop by to check out your equipment and make sure things are running, or at least would it ask you to submit your own paperwork showing that you've had a third party on site to look at it. But I think that this is one of the questions that is going to continue to be asked. And moving forward, I think a lot of the workers are going to want answers as to who specifically is going to be tasked with regulating these types of tanks and regularly inspecting them. And it sounds like right now it's a patchwork, and somewhere along the line something didn't happen that was supposed to.
Yeah. In Longview, the mill is an important part of the local economy. It provides much needed jobs in a shrinking industry. I talked a little bit about the fact that I had family in Port Angeles earlier. The timber industry on the peninsula, all over the Pacific Northwest, as you mentioned, such an important thing. Much of my family, was part of that timber industry in the Port Angeles area. I know how important it is to many communities, and the processing of that timber, also very important. But as we've been talking about, resource extraction can be hazardous. Can you talk a bit about that balance in Longview between the economic importance of an industry like this and the hazards that come with working at these plants?
Yeah. So this plant, its parent company is Nippon Paper Group. It's a Japanese company. And I bring that up because they bought it from Weyerhaeuser in 2016. And I think this shows a little bit about what's happening in the industry, where there's a little bit of consolidation happening, and paper mills are closing down, consolidating, and in this case have an international owner. So you're creating this tension already on the ground, where you have people working at these facilities that are really passionate about the industry and really involved in the community. And then you may have a parent company that's not on the ground and potentially not even in the state or the country. So I think that sets up a little bit of tension already. So as I was researching this story, I spoke with Associate Professor of History at the University of Oregon, Stephen Beda. He specializes in the timber industry and has specifically studied labor in the timber industry in the Pacific Northwest and the paper manufacturing industry as a subsector of that. And I asked him about the number of jobs in this industry, because overall across the country, it's fallen by a lot. So it's fallen about 230,000 jobs over the last 2 decades. And we also have seen a lot of mill closures across the country. But Beda told me that these jobs are still really important in these areas, and that even though jobs are disappearing in the industry, he said that communities, they've adapted to that they've expected that. And here's what he told me about the industry today.
As the industry has stabilized, I think a lot of workers in the industry and people in a lot of these communities have, very much adapted to the kind of new reality of smaller harvests, less employment, but still very much, this is an industry people really care about. This is an industry people are really passionate about. This is an industry that remains important to the Pacific Northwest.
And Beda told me that even though some of these communities may still be struggling economically as the industry has struggled, that they have created very culturally rich communities and very strong support bonds in their communities. And he thinks that that's one of the reasons why, these families in Longview will get the support they need as they move through this tragedy.
Kyra Buckley is a business reporter for Oregon Public Broadcasting. She's been talking with us about the implosion at the Longview paper and pulp mill last week, and why that industry is dangerous, and also why it's important to the local communities around the Pacific Northwest that still are home to that industry. Kyra, thank you so much for being here.
Libby, thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to Soundside. Don't forget you can listen live on KUOW 94.9 FM Seattle at noon and 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, or anytime online at KUOW.org or on your favorite podcast app.